Hello and welcome to 5-Year Club video number 92. Escaping poverty, but first, March was a success. But that means...
Look, it has begun. It has begun!
Yeah, that means that the 401k maxing has begun. And so I'm broke. Oh, that's
Come on,
nice.
choose.
Keeps playing. All right. So, was going to get sushi tonight. Walked there. Line was too long. But it was a nice walk. Walk. Yep. I like walking to get food rather than driving because those short driving trips are not particularly fuel efficient, and by walking you are being healthier, so it's kind of a double money win if you can walk to a grocery store or walk to a restaurant. Mari, this is like the 17th time you jumped up here. You're not supposed to be up there. All right. So I ate some pasta instead, and then I was like, oh, I should figure out what I'm doing for April, so let's look at April. Yeah, so about $216 extra that I'm just going to let sit around in case something comes up, so a little bit of cushion there. And I just wanted to point out that this storage unit I'm paying for, I wanted to emphasize to myself, yeah, it's to maintain this cost in retirement, I would need to save $41,000 more. And so if I want to be financially independent, $41,000 of savings earlier, I need to get rid of this stupid storage unit. And I've known that for a while. I just haven't had enough pressure and pushing on me. So maybe that is what's going to happen in April. But the money just keeps coming out of my account and I keep ignoring it. So that's bad. I encountered an article today that I've read before. It's from 2017. And I don't remember. I think somebody in one of the Mustachian Facebook groups posted it. And it also reminded me of a video that Beat the Bush posted about how to get out of poverty. Which, I love Beat the Bush, but I also think that some of his how to get out of poverty stuff is about saving money, and really getting out of poverty is about earning money for the most part, because no matter how much you save, you just can't build net worth if you're not earning. And certainly earning a lot of money is a difficult topic in general. So, yeah, I wanted to touch a little bit on that today, and I want to read this article. Escaping poverty requires almost 20 years with nearly nothing going wrong. The MIT economist Peter Timman argues that economic inequality results in two distinct classes, and only one of them has any power. By Gillian B. White. A lot of factors have contributed to American inequality: slavery, economic policy, technology change, the power of lobbying, globalization, and so on. In their wake, what's left? That's the question at the heart of a new book, The Vanishing Middle Class, Prejudice and Power in a Dual Economy by Peter Timman, an economist at MIT. Timman argues that, following decades of growing inequality, America is now left with what is more or less a two-class system: one small, predominantly white upper class that wields a disproportionate share of money, power, and political influence, and a much larger, minority-heavy, but still mostly white lower class that is all too frequently subject to the first group's whims. Well, if you'll remember, I did a video before on who is in the top 1%, and I think it's worthwhile to say here, that this says one small, predominantly white upper class that wields a disproportionate share of money, power, and political influence. And I wonder, when he says small, what does he mean here? Because in the next paragraph, he talks about 20%. And I can tell you the top 20% of America is not upper class if upper class is financially independent. Not even close. They are highly, relatively well-paid, skilled workers. But let's just read the article. Okay. America is now left with what is more or less a two-class system, one small, predominantly white upper class that wields a disproportionate share of money, power, and political influence, and a much larger minority-heavy but still mostly white lower class that is all too frequently subject to the first group's whims. Timon identifies two types of workers in what he calls the dual economy. The first are skilled, tech-savvy workers and managers with college degrees and high salaries who are concentrated heavily in fields such as finance, technology, and electronics, hence his labeling it the FTE sector. They make up about 20% of the roughly 320 million people who live in America. The other group is the low-skilled workers, which he simply calls the low-wage sector. There's a concept, I think it's taught in business school, it's taught in other places, called the Pareto principle. Did I pronounce that correctly? And what it says is that the Pareto principle is a principle named after the economist Vilfredo Pareto that specifies an unequal relationship between inputs and outputs. The principle states that 20% of the invested input is responsible for 80% of the results obtained. And his point here is not that 20 and 80 are magical numbers. His point was that in most systems, a small number of causes is responsible for most of the effects. And in this case, we could apply the Pareto principle and say, okay, it's a fact that the top 20% of earners in America own 90% of the assets. And what Pareto is saying is that it would be very unusual if, the assets were divided evenly across all the people in the country. Because in most systems, a small number of the people produce most of the output. And so that's not, what's my point with that? My point is that this wouldn't be unexpected. What would be unexpected would be if we had been able to optimize the bottom 80% to be so productive that that this gap wasn't there. Timon then divides workers into groups that can trace their family line in the U.S. back before 1970, when the productivity growth began to outpace wage growth, and groups that immigrated later, and notes that race plays a pretty big role in how both groups fare in the American economy. In the group that has been here longer, white Americans dominate both the FTE sector and the low-wage sector, while African Americans are located almost entirely in the low-wage sector, he writes. In the group of recent immigrants, Asians predominantly entered the FTE sector, while Latino immigrants joined African Americans in the low-wage sector. After divvying up workers like this, and perhaps he does so with too broad of strokes, Timon explains why there are such stark divisions between them. He focuses on how the construction of class and race and racial prejudice have created a system that keeps members of the lower classes precisely where they are. He writes that the upper class of FTE workers, who make up just 1/5 of the population. Okay, so they are saying that 1/5 of the population is upper class. So I guess in that case, they wouldn't be using financial independence as a definition for upper class. Has strategically pushed for policies such as relatively low minimum wages and business-friendly deregulation to bolster the economic success of some groups and not others, largely along racial lines. The choices made in the United States include keeping the low-wage sector quiet by mass incarceration, housing segregation, and disenfranchisement, Timon writes. And how is one to move up from the lower group to the higher one? Education is key, Timon writes, but notes that this means plotting, starting in early childhood, a successful path to and through college. That's a 16-year or longer plan that, as Timon compellingly observes, can be easily upended. For minorities especially, this means contending with the racially fraught trends Timon identifies earlier in his book, such as mass incarceration and institutional disinvestment in students, for example. Many cities, which house a disproportionate portion, that probably could have been a better word choice, a disproportionate portion of the Black and increasingly Latino population, lack adequate funding for schools, and decrepit infrastructure and lackluster public transit can make it difficult for residents to get out of their communities to places with better educational or work opportunities. Timon argues that these impediments exist by design. Despite the bleak portrait he paints, he doesn't believe that the U.S. necessarily has to be like this. He offers 5 proposals he says might help the country return to more equal footing. Some are fairly clear levers that many before him have recommending pulling. Okay, that's not correct. Expanding access to and improving public education, particularly early education, repairing infrastructure, investing less in programs like prisons that oppress poor minorities, and increasing funding for those that can help build social capital and increase economic mobility. But other suggestions of his are more ambitious and involve fundamentally changing the cultural beliefs that have been reinforced over generations. Timon advocates doing away with the belief that private agencies can act in the interest of all citizens in the way that public entities can and should. His final recommendation is to address systematic racism by reviving the spirit of the Second Reconstruction of the 1960s and 1970s, when civil rights legislation helped to desegregate schools and give Black Americans more political and economic power. Timon notes that not all of these things need to be accomplished in order for America to reverse the increasingly divided path it's on, but at the moment, implementing even one of the recommendations would prove a tall order. I haven't read the book, so I guess I should if I want to understand this article better. I know that the failure of many public pension systems, including that in Chicago, including that for California, leaves me very skeptical of public entities' ability to manage things for the good of people. Social Security, similarly, is a giant, horrible waste of money and has been extremely poorly run, and certainly part of that is political. The reason why I wanted to read this article is because I think that it's full of a lot of things that, for example, you're not going to hear Dave Ramsey say. I don't think Dave Ramsey is going to read this article and say, wow, this economist is really astute. And part of the reason why this article doesn't appeal to many of the people in financial education communities, financial inspiration communities, whatever you want to call it, is that it contains things like this title, Escaping Poverty Requires Almost 20 Years with Nearly Nothing Going Wrong. It's a very discouraging title, and this community is trying to be encouraging. I'm trying to show people very specific things they can do to improve their economic situation, not say blanket statements that do not help someone improve their situation. I've also encountered over and over again in the media people saying things about groups. They say group statistics in order to describe a single person's chances of success. And I think that's insane, because what that's saying is that your behaviors and your choices and your motivation have nothing to do with your personal success. They don't affect the statistics. Instead, only things like whatever the statistics assumed would affect your success, like your skin color or your gender or your birth sex or your the state that you came from, or whatever they are. I don't know. And in my experience, that's absolutely not true. The thing a person chooses to focus on has a dramatic impact on their chances of success in that area. And that's why over and over again, that's why I do these videos every single day, because by doing them every single day, I put this topic in front of people over and over again. And for someone who wants to stay focused on this topic and wants to make progress in that area, having fresh content every single day, talking about things you need to do, talking about encouragement, is helpful and increases the chance of success. Let's look at some other notes that I made here, because I want to show you the way that I think about this article versus the way that I think the article can come across. The article discusses the top 20% of these people as working in finance, technology, and electronics. To me, what that says is, if you want to be in the top 20% of the people, you might want to look into the fields of finance, technology, and electronics. I think that we're very lucky in 2018 that the education that they mentioned in this video, the education that you need, is available for free online. This education for finance, technology, and electronics, especially when it comes to the technology and software sides of things, all of the education that you need, everything that I learned in college, everything that I learned in high school, all of it is available for free online. I'll give you an example. And I'm not saying I didn't get a good education, and I'm not saying that's not an advantage. What I'm saying is, if you're coming from a background where you did not get a quality high school education, you did not get a quality middle school education, you didn't get a quality college education, my point is, you can catch up in a very specific way if you want to by seeking out this information. You can look up the syllabus of a college degree in computer science. You can write down what all those course names are, and then you can look for those course names on YouTube, and then you can watch those videos. That's not, I think, maybe the way that I would go about it. I think what I would do is I would look up tutorials on how to set up very practical things, like how to set up a WordPress blog, or how to set up a Shopify site, or some of the more user interface-based challenges first. And then as you get more comfortable with that stuff, then I would ease into the coding. And then once you go through some coding tutorials and you're successful with those, and you become more familiar with, adding two numbers in code and things like that, then I would begin to read the more formal, or not read, but watch the more formal classes. I'm a lot better for video because it forces me to go through it. Before I had my interview from my last job, I watched this entire class from Berkeley online on data structures. It's got some nice music.
Now, this is the second edition of Headfirst Java. If you buy the first edition,
it's got this lovely long-haired nerd. Love him. He taught me about, what was it? Hash tables, I guess is the name of it, and hash functions. So that was cool. I never had that in class because I was a physics major, didn't need to know it. Other things you can find online are things like this website, Flowing Data. This website, Flowing Data, both creates like interesting maps and visual representations of data, and has courses and tutorials that you can sign up for and pay for. And I believe that let's see, are the tutorials actually here? No, you join today. Okay, so if you join, it's like 11. I don't get any money from this. I don't work for these people. I have nothing to do with these people. I just noticed that if you join a website like this, of which there are many, not just on this topic, but it's $11 a month. And $11 a month is dirt cheap compared to even a community college. And in terms of practical knowledge that you will get, being able to make really cool data representations for companies that want to show data off is that is a practical skill that people will pay you for, and people will pay you well. So there are a lot of resources online, both on YouTube and with dedicated websites to certain topics like that. There's also lynda.com. I know someone who got a business degree and then they decided like, oh, I want to learn about design instead. And they took some classes on lynda.com to learn Photoshop skills. So that's not coding, but that is technology. So the classes taught them how to use the user interface in Photoshop to make different types of buttons and to learn the principles of symmetry and balance and white space and all kinds of design things that Lewis is terrible at. He learned on here, and he was making six figures working as a designer. So, you know, these websites and stuff, they really work. And I'm not saying to sign up for the $20,000, the $12,000 coder boot camp. I'm saying that I think you can make a lot of progress learning things online. But I have to say, you have to be hard on yourself to do this. You have to dedicate yourself to watching at least one video a night, and that can be a very basic video. Something appropriate for your level of understanding, and then over time you're going to ramp up the complexity of these videos. Maybe you'll work through one of the coding examples or one of the problem sets one night instead of watching the class, and you're going to have to commit yourself to doing this every night and just pound away at it, and it's not going to be very fun. But if you spent a year doing this, 365 nights, you're going to make some progress. I guarantee it. Especially if you're starting out with something like Photoshop. Or let's see, GIMP, which is a free version of Photoshop that can do many of the same things without having to pay for it. Many cities which house a disproportionate portion of the Black and increasing Latino population lack adequate funding for schools. This, I think, is one of the most enraging and true facts in America, is that we have kids growing up through no fault of their own in shitty education systems that are not preparing them for the economy in 2018. This is inexcusable, and I think that we need to change the way that schools are funded. For many other reasons too. Including like the fact that teacher pay is dramatically different at schools that are in the same driving distance to a teacher means that the teacher knows they'll get paid more to drive to one school versus the other. That's crazy. That's just really, it's horrible. And so at the same time that I recognize that someone who didn't get a good education has opportunities to advance their education for free, and someone who didn't get a good education needs, well, I don't want to say they need to, but if we know that finance, technology, and electronics is where the money is, and your goal is to get out of poverty, your goal is not to self-actualize or anything, your goal is to make some money and get out of poverty, then you're going to have to force yourself into one of the fields that's making money. And I know that the technology sector is a sector where a lot of this is available for free online, and it's just really painful and slow to learn. So, yep. So simultaneous to saying that, I also think it's important important to discuss that there are big problems in education at a public level, and they do deserve attention, and they are worth mentioning. He says the author says at the end of the article, but at the moment implementing even one of these recommendations would prove a tall order. I don't expect this inequality to change anytime soon. I see the political stuff going on, and I see people protesting, but the truth is that protesting does not teach a person job skills that increases their income. It feels good because people are outraged, and so I guess it's cathartic, but protesting does not do some of the fundamental work that takes 20 years on a nationwide level in terms of changing a public education system. That's a slow process because you have kids who are already in the system. You have teachers who are already in the system who should not be there. And certainly many teachers who are in the system who should be there. You have methods of funding and budgets and shortfalls and pension screw-ups and all kinds of things that have to be resolved. It takes decades. And protesting is great, but there's a lot of really hard work that has to be done over decades to make significant changes in this system. And right now, people are just too angry, and they're not working hard enough to actually do what needs to be done to make these changes. For example, like if you really want to change the education system, you need to not spend money on lifestyle and save that money and then use that money to change the education system, which means you need to be giving substantial amounts to some kind of education nonprofit, or you need to be giving substantial amounts to a local teacher who doesn't have enough money to buy the materials that their kids need. And that's the type of thing that needs to be happening. And like 100% disclosure, I have not given a dime this year to education, and I probably should. I should probably go out and find a teacher and find out some messed up situation where like the very basic stuff they need is not there, and go ahead and buy it. Because I do believe in that. I'm just not used to doing it. I'm not used to spending money that way. And so it's not automatic for me because I don't have something that's ready to go. And that's the power of habit. If you're used to helping out teachers year after year, you don't have to think about it because you already have a good deal lined up. All right. Nobody is coming to save you. This stuff is not going to change if you currently lack money, which means that the only one who's going to pull your ass out of this situation is you. And all of this stuff above that I've discussed that I think like can legitimately lead somebody in the direction of getting out of poverty. And frankly, even if you work in like non-technical positions in the finance, technology, and electronics industries, you still get paid more because those industries have more money. And I know people who are bad at math who make over $100,000 in the technology industry. So you don't have to be a math genius either. When I post a computer science video on data structures, it's because it's the one that I used. But I know people who are not super technical who make great money in technology. So there are a wide variety of options. So you might come into technology from one angle, and then instead of studying computer programming or website building every single night, you might study a different field like project management or product management or something else, or business, or something else that you learn about just by knowing people in this field because you moved yourself to a city where these industries are prevalent. But nobody is coming to do this for you. You're going to have to do it yourself. It's going to take a while. It's not the kind of thing that's going to take 2 years. It's probably something that's a 5 to 10 year plan. So you've got to internally have some vision, and in order to have the endurance to force yourself through this plan, because it's harder as an adult to do that. Certainly people who have kids, that's going to be much harder. And, getting an education after working a full-time job takes more out of you than being able to spend all day at high school or spend all day at college. So certainly this is going to be difficult, and it's going to take a while, and it's going to be hard, which means that you're going to have to, in addition to doing the planning around the technical type knowledge that you need to know, the book knowledge, you're going to need to fortify yourself with all kinds of emotional encouragement to support you through this. It's going to be everything from finding people who you want to be. Before I went to college, I looked up people who went to the colleges that I wanted to get into, and I looked up their resumes, and I sent them emails and asked them, how did you get in? What was your experience? What would you recommend? And most of them ignored me, but some of them responded, and some of them only responded once, and some of them I actually met in real life later and talked to, dozens of times after that. But I still remember all of them in my mind, and by being able to talk to them, the possibility of accomplishing some of these things became more real, and that was encouraging for me. Reading about successful people who brought themselves from a bad situation to a good situation. So I guess you could Google term like rags to riches story and read that stuff. Not because statistically rags to riches stories are the average outcome, but because in your mind it needs to be the average outcome, because it needs to be your average outcome in your kind of world. Reaching out to mentors, like I said before, somebody who's done something you want to do, even if they only talk to you once, you will remember what they say. I remember Carol Sands of the Halo Fund. I said, if I want to start a business, what should I do? And she said, you should get into sales. And I don't see Carol Sands very often. I wish I did. But that advice has stuck with me. And because she said it, I know it's important. And she's successful. And that's something that I wouldn't emphasize as much as I do to myself now had I not had that conversation with her. So you've got to surround yourself in a cocoon of encouragement. Just because this article says it could theoretically take 20 years to get out of poverty does not mean that it will take you 20 years to get out of poverty. I know people, and someone in specific I'm thinking of, it's getting late at night, who earns double what I earn in a year, and they did not do as hard a major as me, but they certainly went after money more aggressively than me after they came out of prison. So their background certainly would not suggest that they have the earning power they do now, but they do. And certainly in his case, a lot of it had to do with who he networked with. And I think the guy has a lot of good personality traits. But the point is, there are opportunities, but you're going to have to sift through a lot of shit before you find the diamond. And to get yourself to do that, you're going to have to brainwash yourself with all this encouraging stuff. I'm going to call it stuff. Could be bullshit. Could be brain soap. I guess that fish fits with the washing theme. And so understand, to get money, you have to delay self-expression. And this is another rough thing, is a lot of people have a self-identity as a nurturer, or have a self-identity as an artist, or have a self-identity as something else. And certainly I felt more artistic when I was closer to college. And one thing that I've realized with crystal clarity over the last 10 years is that a lot of my financial success has had to do with my willingness to set aside my artistic aspirations and embrace the work that was very profitable and push myself forward in those areas. And after pushing myself forward in those areas, I've found art in them. The deeper you get into something, I think a lot of times the more flexibly you see it. But you have to want the money. You have to want the money so much that you're willing to give up a lot of these things. You have to give up where you want to live. You have to give up a lot of times the friend group that you're around. I know I had to move across the country away from all the people in college and all the people in Georgia that I knew. And you have to prioritize earning in your life. and deprioritize a lot of these things that are not earning. And I think that's about it for video number 92. Escaping poverty. It's a complicated, deep issue with a lot of moving parts, but broadly speaking, there's two big parts. There are the social issues that are super complex with a lot of different political opinions and that need attention. And then there is the you issues, which is what you personally have to do to get your ass out of this situation. And they're not compatible a lot of times. A lot of times you need to set aside the politics and focus on brainwashing yourself to move as fast as you can in the right direction. And ignore the statistics, because the statistics are a lot of people who have lost hope and a lot of people who aren't really paying attention. Oh, what an uplifting video. But I thought it was important to talk about. All right, that's it. Have a fabulous evening.